Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to this Film Hub NI podcast. I'm delighted that we're going to have a chance to talk about local films and local audiences and how the impact of local films as such can assist venues in developing audiences, bring new people to the cinemas, and in general, embed the cinematic experience in our local lives. This is all obviously prompted by the success of Belfast, a film you may have heard of, directed by Kenneth Branagh and featuring many of our local actors, which is taking cinemas by storm. And I'm delighted to be joined down the line by two of our cinema CEOs from the QFT, Joan Parsons. Hello, Joan.
Hello.
And from the Strand Arts Centre, Mimi Turtle. Hello, Mimi.
Hi, Hugh. Thanks for having us.
From glorious East Belfast, you're ringing in from. Well, thank you very much for both of you for joining us to sort of talk about the success and impact of a film like Belfast. So really just to sort of get a summation of how Belfast has gone down at your venues. Joan, how's the QFT audiences taking to Kenneth Branagh's vision of 1969?
They're loving it, yeah.
Right.
We've had record-breaking admissions. It's now going to be our biggest film ever. And yeah, which kind of like we sort of were joking about that being a thing that would happen, and now it suddenly happened. And actually it's been a really great kind of moment for the audiences here. Lots of people coming back for the first time, lots of different audiences, family audiences. We don't see a lot of family audiences normally, people who've been shielding for a long time. So it's been a nice kind of like moment, I suppose, to kind of bring people back into the cinema.
Oh, that's good. And how about up in Hollywood Road, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, we've had brilliantly healthy audiences. So again, it's been really nice and very welcome. And the reviews from everybody walking out have been resoundingly positive, which is great. Again, a bit like QFT, we have seen an awful lot of people who have not been to a cinema in decades. So really nice and really exciting to see people coming out and enjoying a night of film for the first time in a long time. And equally, we've seen loads of intergenerational families coming along. So we would always have quite a strong family audience, but not necessarily the kids coming with the grandparents. And that's been really lovely to see that it's bringing people together.
Yeah, I was going to ask about demographics. There was a lot, certainly when Spider-Man was very successful. Is it Spider-Man? I believe it was Spider-Verse. I'm not even entirely sure what it's called these days. But there was a lot of talk about, older people aren't coming back, that kind of, that demographic, that sort of art house independence, older audience was disappearing. But have you noticed them coming back to a film like Belfast, an older audience?
I would say definitely. I think it was always a bit daft to say the older audience aren't coming back when there really weren't any films that were kind of primed for that market. And I think Belfast has really delivered. We were seeing, like before the Christmas, we were seeing kind of a significant reduction in our oldest bit of the demographic in our audience. And that has certainly come back to whereabouts it would be pre-pandemic. And I think we just needed to wait for the right films, and it's always going to be sort of Oscars type films that speak to that audience.
Maybe is it an older audience that's coming out for something like Belfast? I mean, you mentioned intergenerational, which is great, but
yes, predominantly older, predominantly over 60s coming out to it. And but we have seen interest. We've got seniors Thursday silver screenings, and they've had a healthy audience really from middle of last year. Right. So I think Joan's bang on that it's not that age demographic did not want to come out. They just didn't have enough product to motivate them. So, and here we are, like the height of Omicron, and everybody was very happy and willing to come out and see Belfast. So
it's almost as though film journalists just jump the gun too early before there's any actual evidence for their theories. I mean, I wouldn't want to be quoted on that, but and I was going to ask sort of just in general how both of your venues use local film. You know, I mean, a film, it feels a bit twee to say local films for local people and all that sort of stuff, but there is a sense how your programming can connect to local audiences. So I mean, someone like the QFT that's been going for 50 years and someone like the Strand that's been going since 1935, obviously, you know, there's a lot of experience and there's a lot of knowledge of where you are and the kind of offer. But I wondered whether when a film title like Belfast comes along, are there special things you put in place, or do you have a certain way of engaging audiences?
I don't think we had a certain kind of specific way we do it. We similar to the Strand, we're a neighbourhood cinema ourselves, and I think you're always talking to your neighbourhood regardless of which film you're marketing. It's slightly easier when it's locally significant because you know that there's always a level of interest out there in the world, but we're able to kind of contact anyone who's been to see anything Northern Irish or Irish in the last couple of years and send them a kind of directed emails saying this is something you might be interested in, and we can do follow-up and stuff like that. But we really tried to make the opening of Belfast like as fun as we could. I mean, obviously it's kind of it's a serious film, but it's, you know, nostalgic, and there's an element of kind of come out and support this important title. So I think we try to within our sort of promotions kind of be as light as we could.
Joan, you've worked in Sheffield for a long time previous to that. Would, you know, when a Sheffield title or a title that had a particular connection came along, you know, making the audience feel that's important, that, you know?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, in Sheffield, like the key moments would have been Full Monty, which was huge, like huge numbers. And then maybe This Is England, because it was such a local production. And they would always have, I mean, you've already got that kind of level of awareness in the general public out there. There's usually quite a lot of press, but you just know that there's going to be such goodwill behind these films. People want them to do well. People are proud of their industry, creative talent from the region, and the stories that they have to tell. And Northern Ireland is exactly the same. In fact, I would say possibly even more so. There's a real kind of love for and enthusiasm for local stories to be out there. And I think Belfast has a real key kind of moment for the industry because it's having such an impact everywhere else as well. So you know, it's really putting the Northern Irish kind of stories on a very, very global scale, and that's pretty significant.
Yeah, I mean, reports from right across the rest of the UK have been uniformly good, and obviously it's making a big impact in America as well, and possibly will be an Oscar what's the word? Nominee? Is that the nominee, an Oscar nominee? Mimi, I mean, in terms of what the Strand have done around Belfast, you know, seeing, obviously there's a big cinema element in the film, i.e. Buddy goes to see you know, films with his parents, possibly at the Troxy, which would you know, on the Shore Road, which would have been operating at the same time that the Strand was operating in this sort of golden age of cinema and things. So was there any particular kind of you know, opening weekend, or did you do any events around it? Or
well, we had I mean, we're fortunate in that we have a big heritage strand to our overall program, and we do a lot around the tradition of picture houses and people sharing their stories. So I guess we had an established audience base of people who love to reminisce. So it was a pretty quick, easy tap in to that particular crowd. But we then, I mean, we're relatively new as an arts centre, whilst we're also a heritage building. So we have a programme strategy which has been quite carefully researched and curated. And one of the key objectives in the strategy is telling local stories. So whether it's film, and it largely is film, or other art forms, we do consciously try and reflect the stories or people and individuals from Northern Ireland and specifically Belfast, because that's long been kind of proven as an effective way to bring people in to engage in whatever art form it is.
Tell us a bit more about the Strand Stories thing, because it does seem quite an interesting project. You're a year into it now, I think.
We're just past a year into it, and it's funded by the Heritage Fund. So we have a designated heritage officer, and Rosie has been going out and meeting lots of different groups, all ages, from seniors groups right down into primary schools. And she has been gathering people's stories and reminiscing, initially very much focused on the Strand and trying to curate our own history, and get a much deeper understanding of what, as a neighbourhood cinema, it means to the local community. But it sort of very quickly snowballed, where people who went to any other picture house that unfortunately is now lost wanted to share their stories, and it didn't feel appropriate to turn them away. So it's gathered legs, and within that's not just gathering stories. She's been commissioning artists to try and create pieces which will highlight these stories or tell the overall story of picture houses and things. So it's had a really good response.
Branagh certainly talked about, that experience of being taken to the cinema as being very important in his creation. I mean, I've seen him talk about that a number of times, talk about the Troxy, talk about, going down the town to the big cinemas and all that sort of stuff. It's this emotional connection. And I suppose a title like Belfast or local film in general, I mean, it should be said that one of the biggest films that QFT ever had was Cal many years ago in the 1980s. And during the QFT 50th celebrations, Cal was pointed to as being, kind of a real turning point for it. 3 weeks, sellout audiences, the full kind of experience. And I suppose it's that emotional connection that you as venues, as working businesses, need to play on. I mean, Joan, with your experience of QFT 50, you'd only just really taken over at QFT when you came, when QFT 50 was celebrated. Did it strike you as interesting how the emotional connection was there for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was actually really wonderful because I was relatively new. I was able to kind of enjoy it as a first timer to lots of the histories that people were sharing, and also lots of the kind of key films in that timeline. So something like Cal, I certainly hadn't seen, and it's not widely available at all. So I think it was really important for me at that point to kind of have a little crash course, I suppose, in the history of the cinema, but actually also to see people's enthusiasm for sharing their stories. Like Mimi was saying, I think once you've kind of opened that can of worms, you can't close it again. It's really, people love to sell you their memories of the venue, and again, not even just this cinema, the idea that cinemas are part of something bigger than the individual venues, and people's familiarity with them is kind of wider than that. But so Cal held the record for biggest film for a really, really long time. So it kind of feels fitting that Belfast is again the top of the tree.
I mean, I suppose the last big hit was Parasite, I suppose, would have been when that came out. I mean, Mimi, you would have had success with the Spider-Man film at the Strand, and that was really after, with the hit of Omnicron and all that sort of stuff. At least that seemed that audiences were still there, and for the right film, they would come out and things like that. I was going to ask when you have a bottom line, everything looks like a bottom line, I suppose, but in terms of the difference between a big international hit and a big local hit, do you think it's maybe more long lasting in terms of creating relationships with your audiences? So what I mean by that is a lot of people would have come out for Parasite, but maybe didn't come back. But a film like Belfast, it maybe creates more of an emotional connection with the venue. Yeah,
I think very much so. But also a lot of people who maybe came out for Parasite are already cinema goers, and it's part of their habit. They're just all choosing the same film at that particular moment or coming one more time that particular year. But I think the lovely thing about Belfast is that it is starting to create new audiences amongst the Belfast community. So from that respect, that's brilliant. That builds an audience for our whole sector. But the other benefit is that local connection, that you are, those relationships with your audience are quite personal, and you're building rapport. And if they are coming and seeing themselves reflected on screen or something they can really relate to, they're going to feel so much more comfortable about coming into your venue. There's an acceptance there, which is all important to ensuring return visits.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I hadn't kind of thought about that, Mimi, about the familiarity that people would have post that first visit. I think something like, for us, Parasite was the last time we had that kind of huge hit. And actually, in a way, I feel really happy that that's the two that we're talking about for QFT, because they totally represent to me what QFT is about. It's really significant locally, and we have a fantastic audience for local films year round, but we also know that there is kind of an existing cinema audience which are really passionate about foreign language film and stuff like that. So it kind of feels like a nice companion piece in a way. And I would say, like, in terms of local films, we have the data just released from Unique today for domestic product share in marketplaces across Europe. The UK is still one of the lowest domestic market shares. So it's usually about 4% of box office in UK cinemas is for UK product. Now, QFT is wildly higher than that, massively higher than that, and I think probably Strand would be as well. And I think actually, when you have a fairly consistent supply, not all the time, but we have very regularly got feature films from Northern Ireland and about Northern Ireland coming out, that kind of sits there as like a steady supply. And I've always said that, you don't build audiences overnight, you build it through continuing to provide things and having a regular provision. And I think Belfast feels like this kind of like huge peak amongst what is usually a fairly steady audience anyway.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting.
I think the other lovely thing about Northern Ireland in the time that's in it is we have this lovely burgeoning, production sector, and I think that is making our film exhibition audiences more curious and much more willing to try out films and even associate films that are nothing to do with Northern Ireland, but possibly have been partly made here or using talent from here. So they feel a connection to things which they maybe wouldn't have a decade or two before. Yeah,
I mean, you both, obviously both QFT and Strand have hosted sort of many local stuff. Nowhere Special, which was the Alberto Pasolini film, was hosted by you, Strand, and obviously Here Before, which is Stacey Gregg's debut, is coming to QFT soon with a Q&A. And so, for which Sarah Gunsmith, I believe, is hosting as well, just to put a plug in for that. I mean, obviously Belfast is big marketing, Universal, Oscars, all that sort of stuff, but these smaller titles that are coming out, do you think that Belfast audiences are responding to them, or Northern Irish audiences are responding to them?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I think, like, in recent, only in like the last year or so, we've had big successes with Wildfire. We did well with Nowhere Special. We have Dinion on at the moment, the Irish language thriller. That's in its third week. We did Aract, another Irish language film, which is kind of fairly high in our achievements this year. And then before that, we had Unquiet Graves, we had Bump Along the Way, we have Here Before coming out. And that's really quite a lot of feature films for a relatively small place that really is punching above its weight in terms of production. And I think Mimi's kind of absolutely right that there is quite a high awareness amongst the general public in Northern Ireland that there is a big production sector, that there are jobs in this place, that there are things being made here. And I think that only serves to kind of like let those smaller titles kind of just poke their head up a bit more than they would otherwise.
And I mean, I suppose having two or more venues that can present those things in the context that they're held in as well, or the context that they arrived in, so audiences understand that they're local. I mean, I've shown local films before to audiences and they didn't even realize they'd come from Northern Ireland, you know, that it's presenting that context, I suppose, and that experience, professionalism. Just before I let you go, there's a quick bit of a curveball that I thought I'd throw you just as the last thing. There was some talk last week about the idea of quotas with, you know, the movement out of the EU and so on. There was talk down south about the idea of sort of starting to talk about quotas on streamers. The French government are negotiating with Netflix around having a certain level of, I mean, obviously they got a bigger window and all that sort of stuff, but a certain level of French film that was on Netflix, a certain percentage that had to be shown. I mean, do you think, as two cinema operators, quotas are a good thing, or are they? Do you see them as a bit of a restraint of trade? So if you had to show 20% or 30% UK or Irish or whatever it might be, would that limit your ability to serve audiences or improve it, I suppose?
I think it would depend on what would happen if you didn't do it.
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, hopefully you wouldn't go to prison. That would be,
yeah, I mean, I don't have anything against incentives. Mm-hmm. But I think quotas is too restrictive. So the former Europa Cinemas membership that we had until like a few weeks ago required us to meet a certain target of European non-national screenings. Mm-hmm. And it was really clear that if you didn't meet that, you wouldn't get the funding. And if you did, you would get this much. And if you did better, you'd get this much. So it was incentivizing rather than just saying like, you're not going to get anything if you don't do this. And I think as soon as you do it on domestic product, it ends up very risky because like by no means are all UK films really good. And I think, you know, we are independent venues, and part of being independent is that you make decisions on a day by day, week by week basis about what you think is right for your audience. And I think it's great to have incentives that maybe just say like, if you're choosing between this and that, and you know, there's not a lot in it either way, which one of those might help you along that route towards some sort of reward. But actually, I think if you were to strip that right back to you have to make that decision because we're telling you to, it's really restrictive and would cause chaos. I think the independent cinema sector are kind of fiercely independent, to be honest, and very much resent any program control.
I mean, Mimi is an arts centre that's balancing commercial screenings, independent screenings, and your other offer. I mean, is something like incentives would that make your life easier? Well,
it certainly would, in that we're hoping to increase the sort of cultural offer within our cinema program, and it would make it easier for us to justify doing that. But I totally agree with in that it cannot be actual, you know, government intervention and black and white rules on what you do and don't screen. It goes against all ethos of arts venues or film centres, in that you have to have the freedom to program and report whatever it is that you feel relates best to your audience or will provide the best benefits.
Otherwise, it'll just be the studios bullying you into showing films.
So, cinema and film prides itself on being such a global sector. Yeah. And it's quite unique in its ability to reach a very global audience and to tell stories that reach the world. So you're really starting to erode the very heart of what the whole exhibition sector is meant to be doing. So
yeah, well, historically it has been tried before and didn't work then, you know, because basically what happened is that the industry just responded by pumping out lots of terrible films, the quota quickies as they were called. So yeah, I mean, I think it is a dangerous thing, but it'll be interesting to see how the French system works out, you know, in terms of, I think it's a 35-week window or something like that. And then
I think they've just reduced the window in France, but it's still much longer. And there is already existing support for French cinemas to play French films. So they already have kind of a lot more structure in place around support of domestic product, whereas in the UK sector, we've never, or certainly not in recent years, had that sort of level of control, I suppose is a better word. But I would also add that the one thing that we absolutely are not in control of in cinemas is release dates. So a lot of the time the decisions are made not because you do or don't like a film or whatever. You have to make decisions based on the kind of makeup of that specific release date. So I think if you put quotas on, you end up having to make, foolhardy commercial decisions because you have to stick to a specific release date that is not set by you, it's set by somebody else in the first place. So I think until there was a bit more kind of flexibility around it, it's just never going to work.
All right. Well, look, thank you very, very much for your time, both of you today. I presume Belfast is still running at your venues and will be for the foreseeable, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, check out websites if you haven't seen it yet and you want to book in. But just to say thanks, Mimi, and thanks, Joe. Lovely to see you both.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. See you soon.
See ya. Thanks for Joan and Mimi for their thoughts on Belfast. And I'm now joined by Fionntán Macdonald. Hello, Fionntán, how are you?
Hello, Hugh. I am very well. It's very good to be sitting here talking to you.
Well, it's nice. Nice to, indeed. Nice to speak to you as well. The reason we've got you on is because you have produced 5 different articles for the LUMI blog on the QFT website about films from Belfast. And so given that Kenneth Branagh's Belfast has broken all records, it's really been very interesting to take a sort of dive back into films about Belfast in the past. And you've covered them very well, and you've examined them very thoroughly. So we thought we'd have a chat with you about them. Tell us, Fionntán, is it something of an interest of yours? Have you always been interested in films about Belfast?
I would say so. It's sort of a combination of interests for me as well, that being film and history. I'm very much fascinated by both in different capacities, but I find that films focused on the local community in Belfast and in Ireland more generally have such a scope to explore some things that are shared amongst all of us in terms of, themes of even generational trauma, themes of moving past difficult periods that are more universal, but also really do apply to all of the communities within the country and within the city. As well as that, there is a broad knowledge now that Belfast is becoming a bit of a scene for an influx of both, international production as well as sort of grassroots local production. So, of course, as someone who's always had an interest in film from a very young age, whenever that influx started to occur, it really it spurred on an increased passion in me to try and get involved in it, but also to try and think about how film has impacted things in my personal life, in the community surrounding us, and also the future of it in the industry.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I'm 1970s born, so I'm still surprised that people come here to make films. It still seems a bit of a shock to me. So it is very interesting, and I think that there is Belfast is maybe a bit of an outlier because it's a studio film and all that sort of stuff. But I think of films like Wildfire by Kathy Brady, that's out at the moment. It was out and is now touring community cinemas across Northern Ireland. It's, so much can be said, and people seem to be very confident about it. But also, I think what your articles also point out is that, there have been films here before. It didn't just start with Game of Thrones, that there are and have been people making films and trying to use film to explore. So I should tell people what the films that you wrote about. Odd Man Out, of course, the classic sort of the most Belfast film of all, with James Mason by Carol Reed before he made The Third Man. Elephant Alan Clark's sort of seminal, brutal kind of dissection of the Troubles. 2 films by John T. Davis, the documentary maker, Shell Shock Rock, which is a classic punk, and also Dust on the Bible, which is just sort of tremendous film about street preachers in Belfast. Good Vibrations, of course, the Terry Hooley story, or well, the story of Belfast and punk music, I suppose, more than the story of Terry, and also Hunger by Steve McQueen. Tell us why you chose those particular films, Fionntán.
There was a sort of confluence of factors in play for choosing those particular films. Well, I had a huge range of films in mind initially that could potentially play a role in the blog and in the series that I wanted to produce. There was a choice made reasonably early on to focus on some of the underappreciated works, some of the things that either they were very well appreciated at the time, like Odd Man Out, for instance, but have sort of fallen under the radar in more recent years, but in the case of Odd Man Out, in recent decades, really.
Yeah.
And as well as that, just bringing attention to some of the films, such as the ones by John T. Davis, that I think deserve a bit more attention. Yeah. And it was wonderful to go back and look at some of these old films, and even especially I find the John T. Davis films, Shell Shock Rock in particular, because I have an intense passion for music as well as film. And the punk era, especially in and around Belfast, is something that I've always found absolutely fascinating. Even, you know, my father was a roadie for a punk band back in the 70s.
Right, yeah.
And very much, you know, knew the scene, was familiar with Terry Hooley and with all of the bands that, of course, ended up later becoming featured in the great film Good Vibrations also. And as I started to look through the films that I had hoped to cover, I did start to see a bit of a through line throughout them. There are common themes within them of course, political unrest, you know, rebellion in terms of both civic rebellion as well as the sonic rebellion of the punk movement. And then as you sort of progress through it, you see the initial promise of a film like Odd Man Out, which was very classic Hollywood based, beautiful sort of, you know, 3-point classic lighting in the film, quasi film noir style. Not quite to the level that Reed would reach with, of course, The Third Man, which is just a seminal classic. But really building on his own style and moving towards something that would clearly become great. And the role that Belfast and the city played in that was fascinating to me. But then the role that film started to play in the history of Belfast, more than the role Belfast played in the films,
was
also something I found quite fascinating.
How do you mean? Explain that a wee bit.
Well, you could very much see how, especially in recent years, the depictions of Belfast have become much more positive. It's a far cry between the depiction of Belfast in Elephant and the depiction of Belfast in Kenneth Branagh's Belfast 2021.
Very true.
Even though they are very much covering, you know, they're covering, both cover violence, conflict very much to an extent, and within roughly the same decade. I think the Belfast film is set circa 1969, and Elephant, I believe, was released around 79. So just the way in which the identity of our city in terms of international recognition, in terms of our own understanding of it, and in terms of the way that the people from our city see it and express it through their art form is fascinating to me. And something I really wanted to sort of examine in a very particular way.
Did you think that there were, I mean, from reading the articles, what interests me is that there's a theme maybe of people trying to live their life in the middle of conflict. You know, certainly that's true in Good Vibes, and it's true in Odd Man Out, and it's to a certain extent, it's true in Shell Shock Rock and Dust in the Bible to a certain extent. That there's kind of lives going on, even though there is all this other stuff, the famous stuff going on around it as well. I suppose that maybe is what Branagh's trying to point at. You know, that this is, I mean, really at heart, Branagh's tale is a very small domestic tale about people deciding to move to another city. It isn't a huge, you know, kind of narrative in that sense, but it is that story of film trying to say, you know, that there are human lives in the middle of this. There's human cost to what is going on. Do you think that there's that's maybe something that people specialize in now? You know,
I would say so in a way, and certainly I felt watching Kenneth Branagh's Belfast that film and the craft of film and appreciation of film not only plays a role in the movie itself, but clearly in his life. And you can see throughout the film even in the wonderful cinematography that has very much switches from sort of black and white classic Hollywood kind of palette to isolated use of color whenever he and his family go to see the pictures.
Yeah.
The films are all depicted in full Technicolor when him and the character of his grandmother go, played by, of course, the wonderful Judi Dench, go and see
Oscar nominated Judi Dench, I should say.
Well, for what it must be the 2000th time, I imagine. She's
she must be used to it by now.
Quite pleased to see today that I believe Kieran Hines has been nominated for.
Which is great because he's such a great actor.
I in fact saw him live in a play many years ago with my own grandmother, and have very much followed his career ever since. Considering he is good in essentially everything.
Yeah, I've never actually seen him do a bad performance, as far as I remember.
Certainly for myself, watching the new Belfast film, I felt he was very much the beating heart of it. As an actor who clearly has a passion for film, has followed it throughout his entire life and career, and is now sort of returning to make a very heartfelt film about the city he's from, with a director who was, of course, born here.
Yeah.
And I felt that more than any of the other performers, while they all did a fantastic job, that Kieran Hines captured something about the identity of Belfast and the identity of the people of this city. In that performance,
he's also, his character is an instantly recognizable Belfast person. You know, we would have called him an old hand, an old hand, and you know, there's a sense he's dressed to a certain extent like a bit like a shipyard worker that we would have seen and things. There's a Davy Hammond film about the shipyards called the Steel Chest, the Hammer, and the Barking Dog, and there's a documentary, and the way that Hines is dressed in it is very reminiscent of that kind of working man from Belfast, you know, the duncher and the donkey jacket and all that sort of stuff. It's very kind of he just gets that just right.
Well, I found it quite significant as well that there is a sort of extended montage of scenes shot in modern Belfast to open the new film. And the last one of those is a mural by the Titanic Quarter, which I very much love walking past. I think it's a fantastic piece of art.
Yeah.
Then you crane up from this wonderful color, fully rendered piece of art into this much more limited, old-fashioned palette. And of course, this is a modern film. Yeah. Depicting old-fashioned people. And the last thing we see through the modern lens is a representation of an industry that was once the foundation of Belfast, but is now sort of gone the way of the dodo and is now no longer the industry it once was.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I was going to ask, I mean, you are maybe a Good Friday Agreement. You know, I don't know when you were born, but I presume it's sort of towards the end of the Troubles. Watching something like Elephant, and you wrote very, very lyrically about how Elephant kind of is such an effective piece of filmmaking. How did, from your lens, you know, from seeing it beyond the other side of the Troubles, how did that affect you, I suppose, seeing it?
I would say I had a visceral reaction to it for very good reason. For anyone who's seen the film, it is, and trying to explain it to people who have never seen it is quite a task, because it's essentially a montage over 40 minutes of murders without any real dialogue, without any real characterization, apart from the fact that all of the people are very conspicuously inconspicuous. They all seem like they could be anyone on the street. They seem like they could be someone you know. At one stage, one of the gunmen stops to have a kickabout with a couple of younger people before he commits the atrocity he's about to commit. Yeah. And for me, viewing it was very uncomfortable, but in the most educational way. It's a sort of heart-wrenching film, and as someone who does obviously know the streets and the buildings of Belfast, in each frame, you will recognize things. You'll know the streets. You'll know the bathhouse that the first murder takes place in, which has now been converted into something completely different. You'll know maybe some of the playing fields where the kickabout takes place, some of the petrol stations where men are gunned down and left to bleed out and die in poses that it turns out, of course, were based on real murders that took place there.
Yeah, that's right.
And which really captured something about the everyday nature of the violence. and to return to something that represents that really shows you how important it is to never return to that kind of time in our real lives, and to really appreciate how far we have come, but also how dangerous it is to fall back into old ways. And for films based in Belfast now, such as, for instance, the Great Good Vibrations and the new Kenneth Branagh film, they are much more heartwarming, nostalgic, and take a look at the positives of our conflict, like a wonderful music scene that could not have emerged from a different sort of era, or a small domestic story about a family in domestic conflict, just as they much are in civil conflict in the area surrounding them.
Trying to cope. No, that's very interesting. I mean, Elephant has been criticized and lauded in equal measure for its kind of brutality, but it does. We tend to think of the history of the Troubles in like from atrocity to atrocity. So, you know, the big spectaculars. So you would sort of move through Bloody Sunday and up to Black Friday and all that sort of stuff. And actually, I think maybe what Elephant captures is the kind of day-to-day banal, just killingness of it. You quoted Bernard McClaverty, and which was the inspiration for the title in it. You know, the elephant in our living rooms. It was everywhere and all encompassing. So it actually became almost like normal life, bizarrely enough.
Yeah, and you know, we've broken down a lot of those barriers in the decades since the Good Friday Agreement, but there is still very much a sense of an unspoken tension among different communities within Belfast that nobody particularly wants anymore. But it is there, and there is a sense that while the elephant has maybe
it's in the backyard now.
Yeah,
it's out in the back alleyway. Yeah.
But there's a sense that it could reach the trunk through the window and tap you on the shoulder.
Yeah, you're always aware it's there. I was kind of interested, you know, just in how younger audiences maybe respond to films like this. You mentioned in one of the articles about, I think it's about Good Vibes, which is kind of that sense of very often young people now express it kind of, I want to talk about real politics, I want to talk about identity, or I want to talk about women's rights, or I want to talk about, you know, equality, diversity and stuff like that. Whereas there's another argument going on. Do you think that watching films like this maybe give people a sense that, you know, that they're not alone, that this generation is, you know, that other generations have faced that same problem as well?
I certainly think it should. There has been a bit of a disconnect, I find, between the sort of post-Good Friday Agreement or ceasefire generation, as they've come to be known, and the people who lived through the conflict. There's a sense from the older generation that sometimes people born, you know, since the Good Friday Agreement are a little bit naive, a little bit unknowledgeable about things, maybe are disinterested in politics, when that's not necessarily the case. Maybe they're just disinterested in rehashing the past. But there's a great quote I always tend to go back to, is that those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. And that's one of the things I truly appreciate about the films that have documented Belfast through the years, is that they are these sort of living documents of our history. And they are living documents of how our community has developed throughout the years. Whether they're modern takes on it, or whether they are those sort of cultural artifacts from decades gone by, there's always something to learn from it. And they're also very entertaining, which helps you learn.
That's very true. Well, Fionntán, that's great. Thanks very much. Again, everyone, you can read those blogs on the QFT page, the QFT website, and have a read of those, because they are really, really interesting. And there was much more we could have talked about today if we had more time. Fionntán, I'm very grateful for your time. Is that the end of the series, or are there going to be more?
No, I'm intending on doing a few more. I'm hoping to sort of go away and think of a couple other things. There's a great local filmmaker, film critic, and just sort of all-round encyclopedia of knowledge called Joan Parsons, who I'm very sure you're aware of.
But I know his work, yes.
And he made a film, sort of this wonderful lyrical film called I Am Belfast. And that is this sort of quite poetic take on the film's history, and that's something I think I particularly want to look at, as well as maybe going back and thinking of some of the more obscure ones that people may never have heard of, and trying to sort of bring a little interest to them as well. But we'll see how it goes.
Well, yeah, that's great. Thanks for your time, Fionntán, and good luck with the writing.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, normally at this time of the podcast, Sarah Gunn-Smith does her famous update of screenings across Northern Ireland. But unfortunately, Sarah's not with us today, so it's up to me. I can't obviously do the drum roll and all that nonsense, so I'll just go straight into it. There's a huge amount of stuff coming up as we climb our way out of Omicron. And there's a lot of Film Hub Northern Ireland members are screening over the next month or so. So things to look out for are Northern Ireland Science Festival are screening from the 17th of February, a wide range of films, a lot of stuff for families and kids, but also documentaries, big films, little films, and screening places like the Nerve Centre, Newcastle Community Cinema, and Belfast. So worth checking out our website where all the screenings are up, or the Northern Ireland Science Festival website itself. But we're really excited to be supporting them again this year to bring film as part of a very exciting festival that happens. Another exciting festival is Cinemagic, of course, and their On the Pulse Short Film Festival is starting up in the middle of March, and they are currently recruiting for jury members to judge short films from around the world. So check out the Cinemagic website for opportunities there. Couple of screenings coming up to tell you about. So Banterflix are back and screening and showing True Romance as a Valentine's special. It's not my cup of tea, but you know, and that's on the 12th of February at the Strand Arts Centre. Also at the Strand Arts Centre on this coming Friday, they're showing Belle, which is the new animated title, and they are offering at the 5 o'clock screening a free mochi, which I am told is a Japanese rice cake for everyone who comes along and buys a ticket. Other things to tell you about are the James Connolly Centre up on the Falls Road are showing a really great opportunity to see Hushabye Baby, which is Margot Harkin's 1980s film starring Sinead O'Connor, with a Q&A with Margot herself. So that's an opportunity to see a film which is very rarely seen these days, but was a seminal classic at the time and hugely influential on the filmmakers of today as well. The Wildfire Tour, which Film Hub NI members are screening at the moment, continues. Check out our website for details of that. That's the brilliant Kathy Brady directed debut. And then across the community sector, there'll be a number of screenings. Fermanagh are showing Systems Crasher. Newcastle Community Cinema showing June, very excitingly. And so check all details and all screenings on the Film Hub NI website, which is www.filmhubni.org. So that's your update. Not as brilliant or glamorous as Sarah Gunn-Smith might have done it, but you're up to speed now. All right, well, thank you everyone for listening in from wherever you are in the world, hopefully maybe in Australia, who knows. It's been great to talk to Mimi and Joan about Belfast and local audiences, and a little bit of an update as well on what's coming along in terms of screenings. So thanks very much. Don't miss the next one, which I hope will have Sarah Gunn in full effect. And thanks very much, and keep watching films.